Yes, and so we'll keep it, precise and be conscious of your time. So we thank you for being here, and welcome for those who are watching this recording. The Master of Legal Studies in Cybersecurity and Data Privacy is proud to present this webinar today, which will focus on the relationship, the intersection of cybersecurity, data privacy, and corporate compliance. Switch slides. My name is Julie DiBiasio, and I am the Director of Graduate Studies. For those of you that are watching this recording, I've probably had the pleasure to speak with many of you. If I haven't, I really look forward to meeting you soon. And it is really my pleasure today to introduce our two panelists. And first, I would like to introduce Professor Brian Ray. He co-founded and directs the Center for Cybersecurity and Privacy Protection here at Cleveland Marshall College of Law. He also teaches in both our JD program and this online of Master of Legal Studies in Cybersecurity and Data Privacy. And I can say from experience and feedback that I've received from our current students, you will be very happy and you are very lucky to have him as one of your professors in this program. It is also my pleasure to introduce you to Kim Moses. Kim is a partner at Calfee and a leader of the firm's compliance services practice. She too teaches in our JD program and this online Master of Legal Studies. So again, you are in great hands if you choose to do this program. You will hear more from both Kim and Brian in a bit, but first, just briefly, I want to go over the agenda today. Brian and Kim, as I stated, will discuss the relationship between cybersecurity, data privacy, and corporate compliance. If we have time, we will go over the program just briefly and the application process. And of course, we will leave time for questions. I do want to mention that at any time for those that are live, we will take questions. So please either put them in the chat or the Q&A. I will monitor that and we will be sure to get to those. So without further ado, the reason you are all here, I will turn it over to Brian to introduce Kim a bit more and get the program started. Brian.
Thanks, Julie. And thanks again to Kim Moses for joining us. Kim has been a big part of our program, starting with the JD program and the Live MLS program, teaching corporate compliance there. And because she's done such an excellent job, because corporate compliance generally is such a big part of the market that this new program serves, I was eager to recruit her, and she teaches two of the courses in the program. We'll talk a little bit more about those two courses. But more importantly, she is a leading expert nationally in this field. And so we wanted to bring her in today and talk about her background, talk about the differences between lawyers and non-lawyers do. And then, as I mentioned, we'll get a little bit into her courses and how the program fits generally into the broader compliance area. And then we'll kick it back to Julie. So probably about half hour total today, depending on the number of questions. So we should get out of here no later than 12:45. So Kim, thanks for joining us. I realize, although we've interacted quite a bit, I think it's the first time I've actually met you virtually or in person. So we got to remedy that. We're semi back to live here at Cleveland, but yeah, we'll definitely have to have lunch or grab coffee. So tell us a little bit more about, we use the term corporate compliance. That's what your courses are called. It's, it's sort of a broad term. It encompasses quite a few things, but it's a distinctive area of practice. And I wanted to hear more about sort of your experience, how you got into it, and sort of what you do as a practice leader in this area.
Okay, so corporate compliance is a term of art, and it refers to, as you know, a very particular type of program that is implemented in all types of organizations, whether it's public companies, private companies, educational institutions, hospitals, you name it. These programs are implemented, and what they are broadly designed to do is to prevent illegal and unethical conduct, and if it does occur, to detect it and then remedy it and make sure it doesn't happen again. So that's what the compliance programs are supposed to do, broadly speaking. they have their genesis, as many of you know, in the federal sentencing guidelines. And as the programs have evolved, it is very much the expectation of the government, and particularly the Department of Justice, that all organizations, certainly those of any size, but really all organizations, have corporate compliance programs. And this trend has been increasing over, the last probably 10 to 20 years. So they're very prevalent, and they are very much, as I said, they are expected. Organizations are expected to have them. So it was against that backdrop where we started working with our clients, who are mostly, I would say, medium to large size businesses, in developing corporate compliance programs. And I and some of the team that I have back at the firm have developed and implemented compliance programs for organizations that don't have them. We have evaluated existing programs and improved on them as necessary. We have, from time to time, I have served as essentially an outside compliance resource, because not all organizations have the bandwidth, either in terms of the number of employees or financially, to hire somebody on a full-time basis. So it's very common for me to provide advice to our clients on all sorts of compliance matters, and that would also include compliance training. So that's big picture, sort of what I do in the compliance space. And after having done this for a number of years, Lee Fisher approached me and had indicated that this was a burgeoning area that the law school wanted to really start focusing on. And that was when I started teaching in the compliance space in, I think, about 2017. So that's sort of big picture what I do.
Yeah, no, that's a great introduction. And as you say, we think of compliance as a generic thing, but corporate compliance, it really does have this specific, it is a specific term of art that encompasses certain areas. And we'll talk more in a bit when we get to your courses about how cybersecurity and data privacy fit into it. But a lot of compliance professionals aren't lawyers, correct?
That's absolutely true.
And so how does that play out? What are the different roles that lawyers and non-lawyers play in this space?
Well, see, and it's funny because the lawyers, I think, actually were a little late to the compliance game, if you will. This was a space that was largely occupied by non-lawyers for many, many years, and still continues to be run by people who aren't lawyers. A compliance professional in any organization is really going to need to be able to administer and run the program. While they're going to need to be generally familiar with whatever legal or regulatory risks face that organization, the real important role that the compliance professional faces is making sure that the program runs, that the employees are well aware of what their obligations are under the program, for ensuring that appropriate training is done, for running investigations if and when they need to. It's really the mechanics of the program. And then if and when specific legal expertise is required, non-lawyers certainly will either work with the company's in-house counsel or outside counsel in order to get the appropriate legal advice. But you certainly do not have to be a lawyer in order to understand how compliance programs do run or should run. So, and that continues to be the case. In fact, I think most compliance professionals and organizations often are still not lawyers.
Yeah, and so it's one of these, well, increasing number of spaces where you've got a set of functions that are driven by legal and regulatory requirements, but primarily work as operational aspects of the organization. Cybersecurity has lots of those, right? Of course, and intersects with compliance, as does privacy. But as you know, and it's interesting how history does matter in these roles, right? Sometimes there are roles the in-house counsel traditionally has done, with paralegals doing some of the stuff that that other professionals might do. But compliance, as you say, sort of came from the other side, and lawyers got involved, and now some of those chief compliance officers are legal, are people with JDs. But you don't have to have a JD, which is
Right.
which is nice. Why? But it may seem obvious, but why is it though important to have a pretty solid understanding and a relatively deep background in law, and in particular the laws and regulations that a compliance professional deal with?
So, setting aside the program structure and the way a program is supposed to operate, one of the key things that a compliance program has to do is to understand what are the legal and regulatory requirements that are facing your organization, and how do we ensure that we are complying with those requirements. And we can get into what some of those requirements are in a couple of minutes, but the compliance professional at least has to have a working understanding of what all these, at least the most prevalent risk areas are, because without that understanding, the compliance professional is not going to be able to effectively identify or determine whether a particular company is complying with its legal and regulatory requirements or not. So while you don't necessarily have to have the depth of understanding that a lawyer might have in these various areas, you have to at least know enough to know when there is an issue.
Yeah.
And when you need to consult your lawyers, and when you need to run it up the flagpole to the, to the board of directors, and to really make sure that everything's operating as it should. So there's certainly, even though you don't have to be a lawyer, there is a definite intersection here that does require anybody in a compliance role at least to have a working understanding of some law.
Yeah, because you don't want to just be looking at a checklist and checking it off. You need to understand substantively, hey, because of course it's not cookie cutter. Every organization is different. Exactly how you do this requires you to be able to make some decisions, and then know when that decision needs to be made by someone who's in-house, or, as you said, outside counsel, because it is a much more complicated legal decision. Again, interesting analogy in cybersecurity, where the forensics group, the forensic technical professionals, they have to understand what the laws require, and usually have a really strong operational understanding, because they have to translate the technical operational pieces and make a decision, or at least be able to consult and be an active partner with the lawyer in deciding, hey, has there been a breach, for example. Anyways, it certainly makes a lot of sense. And so, credential wise, I know there are a number of sort of more formal credentials out there, and actually we're Cleveland State has a relationship with one of the credentialing groups that we're working to get migrated into this program. But what are the kinds of credentials that non-lawyers tend to have as compliance professionals?
Well, there is one body that provides that I think is the prevailing certification body. It's called the SCCE, and they have a number of subspecialties. And when organizations are looking for a formal certification, this is generally the organization that is going to provide that certification. And you can get it if you're a lawyer and if you're not. And what it really requires is that you sit down and you take a written exam. In the general compliance space, it's going to cover sort of compliance 101. And we'll talk about that a little bit when we start talking about the different courses and that. And then there are a number of subspecialties for which certification is also available. And I should note, you don't have to have the certification to become a compliance professional,
right?
But there are a lot of organizations, that when they're posting something on a job board, they will say certification is preferred, because it does imply a certain baseline level of knowledge. And there are also specific certifications. So there's a specific certification in fraud. There's a specific certification for healthcare. For insurance, for international compliance are the ones that come to mind immediately, because the bodies of law that pertain to those areas are a little more specialized. But you know, more than even just also the certification, there are skills that organizations are going to look for that are very that are useful, and I think to some extent necessary for compliance professionals. The first is really going to be involves effective communications skills, because you are, as a compliance professional, the individual, or it can be a committee, that is going to need to interact with the board and the senior executives of the company, and they're also going to need to interact with the employees of at all levels of the organization in order to ensure that they really understand what the program is about, and to get buy-in at all levels of the organization so that the program is effective. And so when you go and you know, when I get all geeked out and I start studying, like, you know, what's, you know, what does everybody say is the most, you know, are the most important skills? Communication skills and organizational skills almost always rise to the top of that level, to the top of that list, excuse me. So, you know, those are the softer skills, and then there are the certifications available in a more formal setting.
Yeah,
and I believe that the structure at Cleveland State, I think if you and I are talking about the same thing, I think they're trying to structure the compliance programming so that if somebody went through the compliance courses at Cleveland State, they would be able to sit down and take that, and they will be equipped with what they need to have to sit down and take that exam. We wouldn't be administering it, but you should have be able to have that background, you know, should you want to sit down and take that exam. And it's I think it's like 3 hours, and it's a multiple choice exam in case you want to revisit your SAT days, you know.
Yeah, or LSAT days. Yeah, and so that's a perfect transition into the courses that we're going to talk about next. But just to pause and underscore that point, one of the benefits of the several programs we have here, but in particular the Cybersecurity and Data Privacy Online program, is that we do try to at least track and map towards multiple different certifications. And we're going to talk about your courses now and how they help prepare you to be able to sit and take these external certifications in compliance generally, and then also our privacy law and management course, which goes over a lot of ground, similar ground as your courses, but in the specific context of a privacy program, maps to the IAPPs, which is a separate certifying body that is privacy specific. And then our technical courses, the technical capstone in particular, are tracked to certified ethical hacking. And so, and the reason why you know, just to take a step back, a master's degree goes deeper into all of these things, but it's still really useful when you're in a particular field and you decided to pursue a particular profession to get the specific certification, because it just, as Kim said, gives you that objective attestation. Hey, you have sat down and bothered to you know, become competent in a particular specific area, in addition to getting the master's. And so as Kim said, lawyers often get the IAPP certification and the compliance certification, and of course folks with CS degrees will get these technical certifications. So moving then into your courses, Kim, so you teach 2 courses in the MLS program. And there were courses that, as you said, you had already created for our JD and live MLS program, and they fit so well into what we were trying to do and give. As I explained it, at least, you can tell me if I'm wrong. I tell students, well, this takes the lens out broader than the coursework you're doing that's specific to cybersecurity and data privacy law and technology, and lets you understand, hey, this is how this stuff is going to fit into a broader compliance program. Because a lot of professionals, they're not going to be dedicated privacy cybersecurity, although increasingly you are getting those privacy roles, especially. You're going to be doing this as part of a bigger program. So tell us about those 2 courses and what you cover and why you structured them the way you did.
So the first course, Corporate Compliance 1, very creative, really discusses the structure of compliance programs and how they are supposed to work. The Department of Justice, and it finds its roots, as I said earlier, in the federal sentencing guidelines. And the Department of Justice has set out 7 or 8, depending on which you're reading, elements that are really necessary parts of every corporate compliance program. And so what we spend time with in the first class is studying what makes for a compliance program, what makes for an effective compliance program, what are the various elements, what are they supposed to do, how do they operate, what do they mean, what are you trying to achieve? So, whether it's developing written policies and procedures for a compliance program, or training, how do you conduct an internal investigation, elements that are really should be part of every single type of compliance program. So there's sort of a universal applicability. When I built the program, I actually conceptually, before I got my certification, I took a 5-day program that was put on by the SCCE, and they sort of went through this. And so I tried to model this on that program, because that prepared me to sit down and take the exam. So that's sort of what the first course is. The second course, Corporate Compliance 2, really goes in, and this is where the cyber area starts coming in. So there are certain, I'll call them risk areas, that are very commonly faced by organizations. Those might include conflicts of interest, privacy and data security, antitrust, false claims, HIPAA, import-export regulations. Obviously, like I said, the whole cybersecurity and privacy area is huge. And a lot of these regulatory schemes and laws face many organizations, and sometimes they may not face yours. But my view was that compliance professionals need to at least have a working understanding of what these regulatory schemes are, so they can figure out whether illegal conduct or unethical conduct is occurring, and if so, what can we do to prevent it? How do we educate our workforce about it, and the like. So the second course is really designed to give sort of an overview of, as I said, the most common risk areas facing an organization. And so it sort of builds on the first semester. So it's much more substantive.
No, it's a fantastic structure. I love it. How you get, and actually the privacy law and management course, it's slightly different structure, because we're dealing with, we sort of survey the laws, and then we say, okay, how do you build a program that manages all of these sometimes competing and certainly often overlapping regulatory obligations in a way that's defensible, because you're never going to be perfect, right? And so, similarly, your two courses pair nicely. Okay, here's all the components that you would need to have. And it's really interesting that compliance is driven by criminal law, right? Which of course always gives things a sharper edge and a stronger incentive, but that the elements of the program are so closely tied specifically to sentencing guidelines, right? Because more often than not, you're dealing with civil regulatory authorities that are driving these things. But anyways, it's a fantastic structure. And of course, one of the big areas that non-lawyers looking for expertise in cybersecurity data privacy end up in is compliance. So that's why we thought it was worth having both those courses in this program. And also, just want to take a step back here and talk about risk. You've mentioned it several times, but that's sort of the common denominator. Lawyers, compliance professionals, security professionals, and for that matter, business professionals in the C-suite. A good chunk of all of them intersect in this, in the need to be able to both identify and then manage risk, right? And that's you mentioned skill sets before. We emphasize that the technical professionals, that's what a cybersecurity risk assessment, literally a risk assessment, is. Deciding, hey, we know these are the known risks. Here are our options to mitigate those risks. Here's what we're going to decide to do, and knowing explicitly that part of that decision-making process involves accepting some level of risk, because the resources are not unlimited, but we want to know that it's there, and then be able to defend the fact that we selected these more critical areas to work on first. And it sounds like that's what corporate compliance does across a broad swath of areas. Is that an accurate way to describe it?
That's absolutely true. And, when we are conducting, risk assessments, we examine all of the risks facing an organization and then weigh them in terms of magnitude and severity. So if something goes south in a particular area, is the impact on the organization going to be catastrophic, or is it going to be minimal? And, we address, the higher risk areas. And I will say cybersecurity, always ends up, for most every organization now, more toward the top of the list. But yeah, so some of the, if there's a risk and if something goes south in a particular area, it's going to be bad, but it's so rare that an organization doesn't need to necessarily deal with it. I know I'm talking a little bit in abstractions, that kind of tells us how to focus on the particular risks facing an organization. So we scale them and then we address them accordingly. And, more often than not surprisingly, the answers to those questions are going to vary from organization to organization. Every corporation's a little bit different, but we do see a lot of the same things in organizations. So we get pretty good at detecting and implementing and identifying things like that.
And then measuring, that's always, to my mind, the hardest. Certainly, I teach a risk assessment clinic periodically, and getting students to understand, how to, that they're no clue, especially using NIST, which has a fairly elaborate numerical scoring system. How do you get something at an 80 versus a 20? What does that mean? And it's well, you go talk to the client, figure out what do they do, and then you got to make some judgment calls around it. But that kind of analysis, this is what I tell my first year law students. I said, you think you're doing this and you're going to learn law and it's going to be like magic. You cast spells no, it's you're going to manage risk for a client. You're going to explain to them, understand what they do, what they're trying to accomplish, what they're facing, and then give them a range of options that are relatively greater or lower risk, and evaluate them in terms of their objectives. And that's again, that's sort of this core of all of these things and where they intersect. Okay, and so then just to close out, I think we've already essentially mentioned this, but just to really underscore it, by taking corporate compliance 1 and 2, regardless of whether you're going to be a general compliance professional or whether you're going to go into compliance with a privacy cybersecurity focus, or if you're again in the technical or business realms, and you want to be able to talk to the folks who are helping to manage your programs and understand and make choices, because ultimately it's those higher level folks that need to decide. How is it that your courses help prepare folks to kind of do that more concretely? Just to give it, or in summary, we sort of covered it by talking through the.
Well, you should. I think by the time you finish, certainly with the first course, you will know basically how to go out and what you would need to do to build a compliance program. What are the various elements, and even if you didn't have a template for everything in front of you, you should have enough that you'll know what needs to be part of a program, how to build it, and then obviously the expertise just comes with with practice and experience. But you should really be able to go into any organization and examine a compliance program and have a pretty good understanding of whether it has the working components of a program. And then the second part really gives you the more of the overview, as I said, of the various risk areas, and then enough so that you will not be able to identify those risk areas that warrant further examination for a particular organization, depending on that organization's risk profiles. So, certainly more focused courses might be in order depending on an organization. If you're in healthcare, you might want some sort of more detailed healthcare compliance or, biomedical ethics, or, some more
Right.
subject, or to your point, cybersecurity and your area. But you would be able, I think, once you finish with these courses, to be able to go into an organization's compliance department and really have a good working understanding of what's going on, and then just apply those concepts to that particular organization.
Yeah, and as you say, get experience with what are the on-the-ground realities that implicate these things. That's always the part that you can't teach. You just got to get experience with either in depth in your own organization or across organizations. Yeah, so that was great, Kim. Just want to pause for a second and ask Teresa. Teresa, if you've got questions specific about corporate compliance for Kim, go ahead and throw them in the chat now, and we'll raise them. Otherwise, we're gonna thank Kim, and Julie and I. Well, actually, Julie will close it out mainly with a little bit for me on the program itself and next steps if you're interested in it. All right, Teresa. Oh, here we go. Teresa, career growth for compliance officers. What is the entry level position for corporate compliance and salary range, I would say? And remind me, what are the two classes for corporate compliance at CM Law? So I'll take that last one. So the two courses that we've been talking about are the ones that Kim teaches, Corporate Compliance 1 and Corporate Compliance 2. And then we'll talk about some other courses that get in the substantive areas that are specific to data privacy and security in our program. But career growth, entry-level positions, Kim?
So I unfortunately am not going to be able to answer the salary question. So
Yeah.
I don't know about that. But entry level really depends on the organization. I mean, some organizations have very robust compliance programs, and you might be a part of an entire compliance department. And sometimes an organization, particularly a smaller organization, might just be hiring one individual compliance professional. But I would say, the easiest entry level are for bigger organizations that have multiple layers of compliance professionals, so that you can get in, get experience, hands-on experience. People don't always generally want to hire you to run the whole compliance department without any sort of experience, right? Although it does happen, just
unless
not that
they're
often.
lean.
So I would say look at bigger organizations that you're going to be able to come in at sort of a, somewhat of an entry level, or if you have the certification, probably even a mid-level. I think if you're coming at the very bottom of a compliance structure, you're probably not going to have the certification that you need. You can probably come in more at a mid-level. But that's where I would say that the best entry level, and it really is a matter of finding the particular type of organization that you want to be in. It could be a general business, but it could be something that's highly specialized as well.
Yeah, and to put a more specific spin on that, in the area of privacy in particular, I mean, cybersecurity, you still don't have cybersecurity compliance folks, but on the privacy area, often there's a subset or a separate group, sometimes under an inside counsel or somebody else with specific needs in privacy, and the IAPP certification there is often one that is desired, and we'll talk a little bit. Actually, we'll shift now. But before that, I just want to. Kim's very busy. I really appreciate you taking the time, Kim.
Well, thanks.
And Teresa and others on the video, feel free to email Julie, and we're happy to to follow up with additional information both about the program and compliance as well. But thanks, Kim. Really appreciate all you do for us, and those are two great classes. Students always have great things to say about you and about the courses. So.
Thank you. My pleasure. Take care.
All right. Take care. All right. So actually, Julie, I'll just take this slide, and then I'll hand it back to you, since curriculum is my expertise, and since I built the thing. So this is the general curriculum. The exact sequence will depend a little bit on when you enter the program. We have 3 cohorts a year: spring, summer, and fall. Our next cohort, as Julie will talk about, will be enrolling for spring. And we always start you with either so there are really 2 sides to our program, and then it's wrapped broadly for some folks in this compliance space, and some folks come from the business side, and some folks are coming from the technical side, interested in those areas. And so it's a program for both lawyers and non-lawyers, but the non-lawyers who enter the program, we get you grounded in the legal side of things. You'll either start with Introduction to American Law or Legal Writing, which are courses that dovetail nicely together. Introduction to American Law is a substantive overview of the sort of core areas in law generally, most of the areas you would take as a first-year law student, with an emphasis on, within those, how they apply to cybersecurity, data privacy, and then some additional areas that you'll encounter frequently in data security and privacy, like legislation and regulation, some constitutional law, criminal law, and some others. Legal writing then goes into more of the specifics of how you find, research, consume, and to some extent create legal materials, which you will be doing in any of these roles. If you're in a technical role and you're doing a technical analysis that you're preparing for a legal professional, you need to understand the laws involved. And if you're a compliance professional, obviously, as we just went through, you'll be essentially doing legal analysis along the way, and then working in conjunction with in-house or outside counsel around those things. And legal writing helps prepare you to understand how to do that. Then on the technical side, Cybersecurity 1, you'll have usually in your first semester, sometimes we'll start you with both the legal courses, depending on when you hit us. But either way, before you take the other technical courses, which are Cybersecurity 2 and the technical capstone, you'll take Cybersecurity 1, which is really puts you a little bit in the deep end, but with lots of hand holding and lots of preparation. You don't have to have any technical background to be able to take it, but we get you pretty deep pretty quickly on the technical side with Cybersecurity 1. Cybersecurity 2 then goes back through those same topics and you apply them in the context of a project, doing the technical side of compliance, set of technical controls for a complex institution, a large research university that has multiple areas in which it has to comply with cybersecurity and data privacy laws. Then within the compliance area, which is sort of the third area of emphasis, as we already talked about corporate compliance 1 and 2, you'll take those in order, not always directly one after the other. And then privacy law and management, as I mentioned, that is a specialized course that talks about how you develop a privacy program, goes through, surveys the major privacy and cybersecurity laws, and then talks about how do you apply them, how do you put them and implement a program that manages in this risk analysis way all of the different obligations. And we've got fantastic professionals teaching all of these. I teach Intro to American Law. We've got seasoned cybersecurity lawyers teaching legal writing. We already met Kim, Corporate Compliance 1 and 2. And then we've got seasoned technical professionals in Cybersecurity 1 and 2. Privacy law and management is taught by the former Chief Privacy Officer of Nationwide Insurance, who sits on the board of Cleveland Marshall's Center for Cybersecurity and Privacy Protection. When he retired, I tapped him and we co-created the course. So you really get you really get the deep experience of someone who's done this for a living, explaining to you, essentially what they would want to see in a younger professional that they've hired. Okay, and then HIPAA and privacy rounds out then the kind of compliance-focused legal courses, and that focuses on the major health law in this area, because as Kim mentioned, HIPAA is a core piece of almost every organization has touches HIPAA to some degree or another, and it's the most extensive cybersecurity and privacy law out there. So understanding the nuances and details of HIPAA really prepares you to understand any major cybersecurity and privacy law. And then cyber law takes things in a slightly different direction, broadens things. This is where we get into criminal law dimensions, national security dimensions, which are of course in the news right now because of the Ukraine situation. There's a whole separate set of maneuvers and incidences that are playing out in the background alongside the troop buildup along the Ukrainian border, and Russia has been engaged in a cyber war with Ukraine really for years now. And so understanding that, we've got a fantastic professor who teaches at the United States Air Force Academy, was part of Cyber Command as a naval intelligence officer. And we're just really lucky to have him teaching those aspects in cyber law. And then, as I mentioned before, the technical capstone is our final piece on the technical side, and it maps to certified ethical hacking certificate. Privacy law and management maps to the IAPP's CIPP certificate, and corporate compliance 1 and 2 prepares you, as Kim mentioned, for the SCCE corporate compliance certificate. So you get a lot of different fields merging here with a focus on cybersecurity and data privacy, which, as Kim mentioned, is increasingly a really big part of compliance in general. If you're going in that direction, and of course, if you're a technical person, there's deep need to understand the legal side. And if you're a business, you need to get all of these things. And so that's our program. The order of them, as I mentioned before, varies somewhat, and we're constantly developing new courses. And so it may well be that when you hit us, there may be options that you can swap out one elective for the other. But for right now, these are the courses that you'll see at some point throughout the program. All right, Julie, back to you.
Thank you, Brian. And because you promised we'll end around 12:45, I will be very, very brief. But that was wonderful to hear from both you and Kim, especially about all her experience. And so if anybody was motivated either to excel in your career, if you're already in this space, or change careers, this program is a great place for you to start. And so I briefly want to say that our next application deadline is April 25th for our summer 2022 cohort, which starts May 9th. So you have plenty of time to apply. The application is very simple. But I strongly encourage you to reach out to me. My information will be on the next page. If you have any questions about the application process, or just more questions about the program in general, we'd love to start a conversation with you to make sure that this program is indeed a good fit before you start down the road of the application process. So again, as a reminder, application deadline for the summer cohort is April 25th, and the summer session starts on May 9th. Here is our contact information, and I know Brian would be more than happy for you to reach out to him as well. You can contact me, and I can set up a time for you and Brian to meet. But we really like to have those conversations with you first, again, just to make sure it's the right fit and help you with anything you need during the process. So I just want to thank Kim and Brian again for their insight and their knowledge in this space. It's truly amazing to see them speak about this program, especially because they both teach in it and they're so passionate about this subject matter. So again, I hope you saw just a little bit of what you would get if you went through this program. Brian, is there anything else you'd like to say before we conclude?
No, thanks, Julie. Julie's fantastic. She'll get you sorted in the right place. And as she said, I am happy and actually eager. I like to talk to students who are thinking about the program to find out what what your objectives are and make sure we're a good fit. And if we're not, sometimes I can direct you to other resources. So thanks, everybody, and thank you, Julie.
Thank you so much, everyone.